The kiss lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds that froze the air around them, silenced the murmur of the lounge, and cracked something Teresa didn't know could break. She felt it the instant her lips grazed the sharp line of his jaw, the temperature drop, the way the space between them turned solid, heavy, like she'd just stepped onto ice that was already fracturing beneath her feet.
Thank you.
Welcome back, family. If you love great stories, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let's jump right into today's story. Teresa pulled back, already grinning, already ready to spin on her heel and claim her victory. But Louis Carson didn't move. He stood there, immovable as carved stone, his body blocking the amber glow of the backlit bar. His shoulders were broad beneath the dark wool of his suit jacket, his frame lean but unmistakably powerful in a way that didn't advertise itself. It was the kind of strength that didn't need witnesses. The kind that already knew what it could do. Teresa's smile wavered. For half a breath, she wondered if she'd just made a mistake she couldn't take back. "You all right?" she asked, her voice lighter than the flutter in her chest. His eyes dropped to her face. Pale gray, sharp, unblinking. They didn't wander. They didn't warm. They fixed on her like she was a problem he was solving in real time. "You did that on a dare," he said. "Not a question. A statement." Teresa swallowed. She nodded. "Yeah. Just a stupid game." The lounge around them kept breathing. A jazz saxophone curled through the speakers. Someone laughed near the velvet booths. Ice clinked in a glass somewhere behind her. Louis placed one hand on the bar beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt the boundary he'd drawn. His other hand stayed loose at his side, relaxed in a way that somehow felt more dangerous. "You shouldn't let people push you into things," he said quietly. She lifted her chin. "I wanted to." That changed something. Not his expression, he didn't smile. But the air between them shifted. Interest. Calculation. He studied her for another slow second, then stepped back, releasing her from the gravity of his presence as if he'd never closed the distance at all. "Be careful," he said. That was all. Teresa didn't wait for more. She turned and walked back to her colleagues, her pulse racing faster than it had when she'd crossed the room. Behind her, Louis Carson watched her go. And he didn't stop watching. An hour earlier, the night had felt like nothing more than a celebration. The lounge was dim and warm, all leather booths and low amber lighting, the kind of place where conversations stayed quiet and drinks cost more than they should. Laughter rippled through the space in soft waves, and every corner was filled with people pretending the week behind them didn't matter. Teresa leaned back in the booth, her blazer draped over the seat beside her, her dark hair falling loose from the clip she'd given up on. Her glass was nearly empty again. She hadn't planned to drink this much, but it had been one of those weeks, the kind that deserved drowning. To Teresa's promotion, her friend Camila announced, raising her cocktail. They all cheered. Bree leaned in closer, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Okay. Truth or dare?" Teresa groaned. "Absolutely not." "Dare," Camila said, grinning. "You always pick dare." Teresa hesitated. Then sighed. "Fine. Dare." Camila's smile spread slowly, deliberately. "I dare you to kiss the coldest-looking guy in this place." Teresa followed her gaze. The man stood alone at the far end of the bar, his posture straight, his presence utterly still in a way that didn't match the easy chaos around him. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He wasn't chatting with the bartender. He wasn't watching the door. He was simply there, tall, composed, separate. He looked like he didn't belong in a place like this. And like no one would have the nerve to tell him. Teresa snorted. "Him? He looks like he'd have me escorted out." "Exactly," Bree said. "That's why." Teresa laughed, but her eyes stayed on him. Up close, she noticed things she hadn't from across the room. The tailored charcoal suit that fit like it had been measured to the millimeter. The clean lines of his jaw. The faint shadow of stubble. His hands, large, controlled, resting on the bar's edge. He didn't look bored. He looked aware. "This is a terrible idea," Teresa muttered. "But you're going to do it," Camila said. Teresa drained the rest of her drink in one go, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. "It's just a kiss." She slid out of the booth and made her way across the lounge, her heels clicking softly on polished wood. Up close, the man was taller than she'd expected. She had to tilt her head back just to meet his eyes. She didn't give herself time to second-guess. She leaned in and pressed her lips to the corner of his jaw. The contact was brief. Light. Almost innocent. And yet, the moment it happened, Teresa felt something shift. Not sparks. Not heat. Something colder. Like gravity had tilted just slightly off its axis. She pulled away first, her breath catching. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Dare." For a split second, she thought he might say something cutting. Something sharp. Instead, he just looked at her. And that was somehow worse. She backed away, turning quickly and returning to her table, forcing a laugh as if nothing strange had happened. But she felt it, the weight of his gaze, still on her. Louis Carson hadn't come to the lounge for company. He'd been finishing a call when he first noticed her laughter cut through the low hum of conversation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It was real. And it didn't try to impress anyone. When she approached him, slightly flushed, determined, reckless, he sensed the challenge before she ever touched him. The kiss caught him off guard. Not because of the act itself, but because of what it left behind. The warmth lingered. The softness surprised him. The way she met his eyes afterward, unashamed, curious, stayed with him long after she walked away. He watched her for the rest of the night. The way she laughed with her whole body. The way she leaned in when her friends spoke, listening like it mattered. The way she checked her phone once, frowned briefly, then smiled as if she'd decided whatever was waiting could wait. She wasn't calculated. That made her dangerous. Teresa tried to forget the moment. She danced. She laughed. She drank water. She told herself she was imagining things. But every time she glanced toward the bar, she felt him before she saw him. At one point, she felt his presence behind her. "You all right?" he asked. She turned, startled. He was close again. Close enough that she caught the faint scent of something clean and subtle, not cologne. Just him. "Yes," she said quickly. "I mean, yeah." He nodded, glancing toward her table. "Your friends look like trouble." She laughed despite herself. "They are." A pause. "Louis," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated. Then took it. His grip was firm, controlled, warm in a way that made her hyper-aware of her own pulse. "Teresa." He repeated her name once. Quietly. Like he was filing it away. Something tightened in her chest. "I didn't take offense," he said. "I didn't think you did," she replied. "You looked calm." His mouth curved. Not quite a smile. "I noticed you didn't ask for my number." She raised an eyebrow. "I noticed you didn't offer it." A beat. Fair. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Camila's name flashed across the screen. Teresa's phone buzzed again as she stepped outside the lounge, the cool night air hitting her flushed cheeks like a wake-up call. Camila had texted 3 times in the last minute, each message more frantic than the last. "Get back here. Teresa, where are you? Do you know who that was?" She frowned, her thumb hovering over the screen. Before she could type a response, her phone lit up with an incoming call. She answered. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Camila's voice came through sharp and breathless. "Teresa, that man you just kissed, that was Louis Carson." The name landed like a stone in still water. Teresa felt the ripple but couldn't yet see the depth. "Who?" A pause. Then Camila's voice dropped to something closer to a hiss. Louis Carson. The Louis Carson. Get back inside. Now. Teresa turned and walked back through the entrance, weaving through the crowd until she reached the booth. Camila and Bree were huddled together, their expressions somewhere between horrified and fascinated. Bree's phone was face up on the table, displaying what looked like a news article. Sit, Camila said, pulling her down. Teresa Saturday. You're freaking me out. Bree turned the phone toward her. The headline read, Carson Holdings expands into South American markets. Questions remain about founder's background. Below it was a photo. The same sharp jawline. The same pale gray eyes. The same man who'd just said her name like it was something worth remembering. He's not just some rich guy, Bree said quietly. He's that rich guy. The one nobody knows anything real about. The one who shows up to charity galas with security details and leaves before anyone can corner him for a conversation. Teresa scanned the article. Carson Holdings. Real estate. Import-export. Consulting. The language was vague, polished, the kind of corporate speak that said everything and nothing. But between the lines, there were other words. Allegations. Unconfirmed connections. Rumors of ties to organized networks. Her pulse quickened, but not with fear. With something sharper. People say he's connected, Camila added, her voice barely above a whisper. Like, connected. Mafia. Cartels. I don't know. But everyone who works with him signs NDAs, and the people who cross him, they just disappear from the industry. Teresa looked back toward the bar. Louis was gone. You need to stay away from him, Bree said firmly. This isn't some fun story you tell at brunch. This is serious. Teresa nodded slowly, her mind still turning over the details. The way he'd studied her. The control in his voice. The warning, be careful. Yeah, she said, her voice even. You're right. It was just a stupid dare. I'll forget about it. But even as she said it, she felt the lie settle uncomfortably in her chest. Camila seemed to relax slightly. Good. Because I love you, but I do not want to end up as a witness in some federal investigation. They laughed, the tension breaking just enough for the conversation to shift. They ordered another round. They talked about Teresa's promotion, about Bree's nightmare client, about anything that wasn't Louis Carson. But Teresa couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her. Not like she was a mistake. Like she was a variable he hadn't accounted for. She excused herself to the restroom, splashing cold water on her face and staring at her reflection. Her cheeks were still flushed. Her eyes were too bright. She looked like someone who'd just done something reckless. She dried her hands and pulled out her phone, opening a browser tab. She typed his name. The search results flooded the screen. Business profiles. Society page mentions. Blurry photos from events where he stood at the edges, always watching, never performing. And then, buried several pages deep, forum threads. Speculation. Whispers. Teresa closed the browser. She should be terrified. She should listen to Camila and Bree and chalk this up to a close call. But all she felt was the hum of adrenaline beneath her skin, the same feeling she got before jumping off a high dive or saying yes to something everyone else said was impossible. Louis Carson wasn't safe. And Teresa had never been good at staying away from things that weren't safe. Teresa was 3 emails deep into a client revision when the receptionist appeared at her desk. There's someone here for you, Maria said, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. Teresa glanced up, distracted. Tell them I'll be out in 5. He said it can't wait. Something in Maria's tone made Teresa look up properly. The receptionist's eyes were wide, her posture stiff in a way that suggested she wasn't just delivering a message, she was delivering a warning. Teresa stood, smoothing down her blouse as she followed Maria to the front desk. The lobby of the design firm was small, modest, all glass and clean lines meant to look more expensive than it was. Standing in the center of it was a man in a black suit, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression professionally blank. He wasn't Lewis. But he looked like he worked for someone who could afford to send messages in person. "Ms. Reyes?" he asked. "Yes." He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and produced a cream-colored envelope. Heavy stock. Her name written across the front in dark ink, the letters precise and slanted. "This is for you," he said, extending it. Teresa took it, her fingers brushing the expensive paper. "Who's this from?" "I was asked to deliver it personally and wait for your response." She felt Maria watching from behind the desk. Felt the weight of the moment expanding beyond what it should be. A delivered letter wasn't strange. But the way this man stood, alert, professional, like he'd been trained to wait, made it feel like something else entirely. Teresa broke the seal. Inside was a single card, the same heavy stock as the envelope. The handwriting matched the front. Neat. Controlled. No wasted space. "Ms. Reyes. I'm hosting a private viewing tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Your presence is requested. A car will be sent to your address at 7:30. I'll see." No question mark. No, I hope you can make it. Just a statement of fact, as if her attendance had already been decided. Teresa read it twice, her pulse ticking up. "Is there a response?" the man asked. She looked up at him. "What if I'm busy?" His expression didn't change. "Mr. Carson suggested you clear your schedule." The audacity of it should have made her angry. Instead, she felt that same sharp thrill from the lounge, the one that told her she was standing at the edge of something she didn't fully understand. "What kind of viewing?" she asked. "I wasn't given those details." "And if I say no?" A pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Mr. Carson is not accustomed to hearing no. Teresa folded the card back into the envelope, her mind already turning over the angles. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. And the fact that he knew where she worked, that he'd sent someone instead of calling, that he'd written it by hand, it was all deliberate. A show of reach. Of control. She should refuse. She should hand the envelope back and tell this man that Lewis Carson didn't get to dictate her evenings. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wasn't going to. "Tell him I'll be ready at 7:30, she said. The man nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Very good, Ms. Reyes." He turned and left without another word, his footsteps even and measured across the polished floor. Teresa stood there for a moment, the envelope still in her hand, her heart beating just slightly too fast. "What was that about?" Maria asked, her voice hushed. Teresa turned back toward her desk. "I have no idea." But she did. Or at least, she was starting to. That night, she stood in her apartment staring at her closet, the card propped against her mirror. She pulled out 3 different dresses before settling on a sleek black sheath, elegant but not trying too hard. Professional but not forgettable. At 7:30 the next evening, a black car pulled up outside her building. The driver opened the door without a word. Teresa took a breath, slid into the back seat, and wondered what exactly she was walking into. The car ride lasted 40 minutes, each one pulling Teresa further from the familiar grid of the city and into something else entirely. The driver hadn't spoken since she'd gotten in. The privacy screen stayed up. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath the tires. When they finally slowed, it was in front of a gate that looked more like a checkpoint than an entrance. Tall. Black iron. Cameras mounted at angles that covered every approach. A guard stepped out of a small booth, his hand resting casually near his hip in a way that suggested he was armed and trained to use it. The driver's window lowered. Words were exchanged, too quiet for Teresa to hear. The guard glanced toward the back seat, his gaze sharp and assessing, then nodded. The gate rolled open with a mechanical hum. The driveway beyond it stretched longer than it had any right to. Trees lined both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the last traces of twilight. Security lights flickered on as they passed, motion activated, illuminating the path in cold white intervals. Teresa's chest tightened. This wasn't wealth. This was fortress. The house, if it could even be called that, emerged from the darkness like something carved from stone and glass. Modern. Severe. 3 stories of clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, most of them dark. It didn't look welcoming. It looked like it was watching. The car stopped at the base of a wide staircase leading to the front entrance. The driver stepped out and opened her door without a word. Teresa took his offered hand and stepped onto the gravel, her heels sinking slightly into the surface. Another man waited at the top of the stairs. Older. Gray at the temples. His suit was just as immaculate as the courier's had been, his posture just as controlled. "Ms. Reyes," he said as she approached. "I'm Anton. Mr. Carson is expecting you." She followed him through the front door and into a foyer that felt more like a gallery. High ceilings. Marble floors that echoed with every step. Abstract art on the walls. Expensive, impersonal. Everything was pristine. Untouched. Like no one actually lived here. The silence was the worst part. Not peaceful. Oppressive. The kind of quiet that came from space designed to swallow sound, to keep secrets contained. Anton led her through a hallway lined with more art, past a sitting room she only glimpsed, leather, dark wood, a fireplace that looked like it had never been used. She saw no staff. No signs of life. Just the faint hum of climate control and the soft tread of their footsteps. They stopped in front of a set of double doors. "Mr. Carson will join you shortly," Anton said, pushing them open. The room beyond was a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, filled with volumes that looked read, not decorative. A massive desk sat near the far window, its surface clear except for a single lamp. Leather chairs. A bar cart in the corner with crystal decanters catching the low light. And in the center of it all, a single painting on an easel, draped with a cloth. Teresa stepped inside. The doors closed behind her with a soft click. She walked slowly toward the painting, her eyes taking in the details. The books were organized by subject: history, philosophy, art theory. Some of the spines were in languages she didn't recognize. Others were first editions, their covers worn from use. This room felt different from the rest of the house. Lived in. Personal. She heard the door open behind her and turned. Louis stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark shirt and tailored slacks, no jacket. He looked less severe than he had at the lounge but no less controlled. His eyes found hers immediately. "You came," he said. "It wasn't gratitude. It was confirmation." "You didn't really give me a choice," Teresa replied. His mouth curved slightly. "No. I didn't." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and suddenly the space felt smaller. The air heavier. "Thank you for clearing your schedule," he said, moving toward the bar cart. Teresa stayed where she was. "You knew I would." He poured 2 glasses of something amber, then turned to face her. "I had a feeling." He crossed the room and offered her one of the glasses. She took it, their fingers brushing briefly. "What is this?" she asked, gesturing to the draped painting. Louis's expression shifted. Something almost like anticipation. "That," he said, "is why you're here." Louis pulled the cloth from the painting in one smooth motion. Teresa's breath caught. It was a Remedio's Vero, or at least, it looked like one. Surrealist. Haunting. A woman suspended in a tower, weaving the fabric of the world itself from threads of starlight. The colors were muted golds and deep blues, the brushwork unmistakable. "This was supposed to be lost," Teresa said quietly, stepping closer. She'd studied Vero in school, written papers on her work. The private collector who owned it died in the 90s. No one's seen it since. "It wasn't lost," Louis said. "It was hidden." She turned to him. How did you? I acquire things that other people can't. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes steady on hers. I thought you might appreciate it. You studied art history before you switched to design. The fact that he knew that sent a chill down her spine. You've been researching me. Yes. No apology. No deflection. Just the truth, delivered like it was the most natural thing in the world. Teresa set her glass down on the desk, her pulse quickening. Why? Because you made a scene, Louis said simply. And scenes, in my world, have consequences. He gestured toward the door. Come. We should talk over dinner. She followed him through another hallway, this one leading to a dining room that felt as cold and formal as the rest of the house. A table long enough to seat 12, set for 2 at one end. Candles already lit. Plates of food arranged with the kind of precision that suggested a chef somewhere in the building she'd never see. Louis pulled out a chair for her. She sat, watching as he took the seat across from her, close enough that the table didn't feel like a barrier. You kissed me in front of 30 people, he said, his tone conversational. By the next morning, 5 of those people had called associates of mine to ask who you were. Teresa picked up her fork, trying to keep her hand steady. So, I've spent years building a very specific reputation. Untouchable. Controlled. The kind of man no one approaches without an invitation. He cut into his food with surgical precision. You approached me. In public. Without hesitation. It was a dare. I know. His eyes lifted to hers. But they don't. What they saw was someone breaking through a wall I've maintained for a decade. And now they are wondering who you are. What you mean to me. Whether the Ice King is thawing. Teresa felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. That's not my problem. It is now. Louis set down his knife. Because some of those people are my competitors. Others are my partners. And all of them are watching to see if I've become vulnerable. The word hung in the air between them. I don't do vulnerable, he continued. But I also can't afford to look paranoid by shutting down every conversation about you. So I'm offering you a deal. Teresa's grip tightened on her fork. What kind of deal? You appear with me. Publicly. 3 events over the next month. Galas. Dinners. The kind of places where my world does business. He leaned back slightly. You'll be introduced as someone I'm seeing. Someone who interests me. It maintains the narrative they've already started writing, but on my terms. You want me to pretend to date you. I want you to be seen with me. What we do in private is irrelevant. Teresa laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You're serious? Completely. And if I say no? Louis's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Then I can't protect you from the attention you've already attracted. People will dig. They'll find out where you work, where you live, who you care about. They'll look for leverage. And they'll assume you're a vulnerability whether you are or not. Her stomach twisted. That's a threat. That's reality. He took another sip of his drink. I'm offering you a controlled alternative. You help me manage the narrative. In return, I make sure no one touches you or anyone connected to you. Teresa set down her fork, her mind racing. This was insane. He was asking her to step into his world, to play a role in whatever dangerous game he was running. But he was also right. The moment she'd kissed him, she'd painted a target on herself. What's in it for you? She asked. Really? Louis studied her for a long moment. You make me look human. And right now, that's worth more than you know. They finished dinner in measured conversation. Louis asked about her work, specific questions that proved he'd done more than skim her LinkedIn profile. He knew about the rebrand she'd led for a local nonprofit, the pitch she'd lost to a bigger firm last year. Teresa answered carefully, still trying to find the edges of this situation, still uncertain whether she was a guest or a pawn. When the plates were cleared, by Anton, who appeared and disappeared like a shadow, Louis stood. "Come with me," he said. She followed him through the house again, this time up a staircase of polished wood and iron. The second floor was quieter, dimmer. Fewer windows. More closed doors. He led her to the end of the hallway and through a set of French doors that opened onto a rooftop terrace. The air outside was cool and sharp. The terrace was expansive, bordered by glass panels that offered an unobstructed view of the valley below. City lights glittered in the distance, a constellation of life that felt impossibly far away. Louis walked to the edge and leaned against the railing. For the first time since she'd arrived, he looked less like a man in control and more like someone carrying something heavy. Teresa joined him, keeping a few feet of distance between them. "Do you come up here often?" "Every night," he said. "It's the only place in this house that doesn't feel like a tomb." The admission surprised her. There was no calculation in it. No angle. Just truth. She glanced at him. In the low light, his profile was sharp, angular. Handsome in a way that felt almost weaponized. But there was something else now, a tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his mouth. "Why do you live here if you hate it?" she asked. "I don't hate it. It serves its purpose." He paused. "It keeps people out. Including you." His mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "Especially me." A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted. Teresa looked out at the city, at the life humming below, and then back at the man standing beside her. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked quietly. "Doing what?" "Being untouchable." Louis didn't answer right away. He turned his glass in his hand, watching the liquid catch the light. "Since I was 23. My father died and left me a company that was 3 months from bankruptcy and a list of debts I didn't know existed." He took a slow breath. "I learned very quickly that sentiment is a liability. That people will take everything from you if you let them see you care." Teresa heard the exhaustion beneath the words. "The cost. So you stopped letting them see," she said. "I stopped letting anyone see." He looked at her then, his gray eyes searching hers. "Until you walked up to me in that lounge and kissed me like it didn't matter who I was." Her chest tightened. "It didn't. I didn't know." "I know." His voice softened. "That's why it mattered." The vulnerability in his tone caught her off guard. This was the crack, the place where the armor didn't quite fit. "You're lonely," Teresa said. Not a question. An observation. Louis didn't deny it. He turned back to the view, his jaw tight. "Loneliness is a small price for control." "Is it?" He didn't answer. Teresa stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You asked me to help you look human. But you already are. You've just forgotten how to let anyone see it." Louis looked down at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. For a moment, she thought he might argue. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch careful, almost tentative. "You should be afraid of me," he said quietly. "I know," Teresa replied. "But I'm not." His hand lingered near her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Then he dropped it, stepping back as if the contact had burned him. "I'll have the driver take you home," he said, his voice returning to its usual control. But Teresa had seen it now. The man beneath the ice. And she couldn't unsee him. Teresa noticed the car 3 blocks from her apartment. It was Tuesday evening, 4 days after the dinner at Louis's estate. She'd agreed to his arrangement, reluctantly, cautiously, and was waiting for details about the first event. In the meantime, life had returned to its normal rhythm. Work. Coffee with Camila. The comfortable predictability of her routine. Except for the black sedan that had been behind her since she'd left the office. At first, She told herself it was coincidence. The city was full of black sedans. But when she turned left at a street she never normally took, the car followed. When she slowed, it slowed. When she sped up, it matched her pace. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her pulse kicking up. She pulled into a gas station, parking under the bright fluorescent lights, and waited. The sedan drove past slowly, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. It didn't stop. But it didn't leave either. It circled the block and parked across the street, engine idling. Teresa's breath came faster. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Louis's contact. He'd given her his number after dinner, told her to use it if anything felt wrong. This felt wrong. But calling him also felt like admitting she was in over her head. Like proving that she couldn't handle the world she'd agreed to step into. She took a breath and pulled back onto the street, heading toward her apartment. The sedan followed. By the time she reached her building, her heart was pounding against her ribs. She parked in the small lot behind the complex and grabbed her bag, moving quickly toward the entrance. The sedan pulled in behind her, blocking the exit. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, wearing a dark jacket and an expression that wasn't quite hostile but wasn't friendly either. He didn't approach. He just stood there, watching her with the kind of patience that suggested he had all night. Teresa's hand shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed. Louis answered on the second ring. "Teresa. There's someone following me," she said, her voice tight. "I'm at my apartment. He's just standing there." A pause. Then his voice, low and controlled. "Go inside. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Louis. "Now, Teresa." She moved toward the entrance, fumbling with her keys. The man didn't follow, but she felt his eyes on her the entire way. She made it inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow bursts. 20 minutes later, she heard cars pull up outside. Multiple engines. Doors slamming. She looked through the window and saw Louis stepping out of a black SUV, flanked by two men who looked like they could break someone in half without breaking a sweat. The sedan was still there. The man was still standing beside it. Louis walked directly toward him. Teresa couldn't hear what was said. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Louis's posture was calm, controlled, but there was something in the way he stood, shoulders squared, weight balanced, that radiated authority. The other man said something, gestured toward Teresa's building. Louis took a step closer. Whatever he said next made the man's expression shift. Not fear, exactly. But recalculation. The man got back in his car. The sedan pulled away. Louis watched it go, then turned and walked toward Teresa's building. She buzzed him in before he could knock. When she opened her apartment door, he was standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, but her hands were still shaking. Louis stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "His name is Renko. He works for someone who wants to know what you mean to me." "What did you tell him?" "That if he or anyone else comes near you again, it won't be a conversation next time." His eyes met hers. "This is what I warned you about. The attention. The danger." Teresa wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't think it would be real." "It's always real." He moved closer, his voice softening. "But I meant what I said. I'll protect you." For the first time since she'd kissed him, Teresa felt the full weight of what she'd stepped into. And she wasn't sure if she was brave enough to see it through. Louis didn't leave that night. He made a call from her living room, his voice low and clipped, speaking in a language Teresa didn't recognize. When he finished, he pocketed his phone and turned to her. "Pack a bag," he said. "You're coming with me." "What?" "No, I'm Teresa." He crossed to where she stood, his presence filling the small space of her apartment. "Renko showing up here means someone gave him this address." Which means they have more than just your name. You're not safe here tonight. Her stomach dropped. For how long? Until I handle it. She wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself. But the fear still humming beneath her skin told her otherwise. She grabbed an overnight bag and threw in essentials, clothes, toiletries, her laptop. Louis watched from the doorway, silent and vigilant. The drive back to his estate was tense. Teresa sat in the back seat beside him this time, acutely aware of the two SUVs flanking them, one ahead, one behind. A convoy. Protection detail. The reality of his world made tangible. When they arrived, Anton was waiting. Louis gave him quiet instructions, and Teresa was led to a guest room on the second floor, spacious, impersonal, with a lock on the inside of the door that she tested twice before trying to sleep. She didn't sleep. At 2 a.m, she heard voices. Muffled. Tense. She crept to her door and opened it a crack. Down the hallway, Louis stood with 3 men she didn't recognize. One of them was bleeding from his mouth, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Louis's voice was calm, measured, terrifyingly controlled. I don't care who sent you, he said. You don't touch what's mine. The man spat blood onto the marble floor. She's just some girl. You're starting a war over. Louis moved faster than Teresa thought possible. One moment he was standing still. The next, his hand was around the man's throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough that she heard the impact from where she stood. Say that again, Louis said quietly. The man choked, his face reddening. She's not just anything. Louis's voice dropped to something colder than ice. And you're going to deliver a message for me. Tell Volkov that if he wants to test me, he should do it himself. Not by sending animals to frighten women. He released the man, who crumpled to his knees, gasping. Get him out of my house, Louis said to one of the other men. They dragged the bleeding man away. Louis stood there for a moment, adjusting his cuffs, his breathing even. Then he turned and saw Teresa standing in her doorway. Their eyes met. He crossed the distance in long strides, stopping just outside her room. You should be sleeping. Hard to sleep when there's, she gestured vaguely. Whatever that was. Louis's jaw tightened. That was me protecting you. That was you nearly killing someone. Yes. No apology. No shame. Just acknowledgement. Teresa's pulse raced, but not entirely from fear. She'd just seen the side of Louis Carson that made people whisper. The Mafia boss. The man who didn't negotiate, who didn't hesitate. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Yes, I did. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. But you don't. She frowned. What? I'm giving you an out, Teresa. Right now. Tonight. He held her gaze. I'll have my people scrub every trace of you from this situation. Change your routines for a few weeks, and it'll be like you were never here. You can go back to your life. No events. No arrangement. No danger. Her throat tightened. And if I stay, then you're in this. Fully. And I can't promise it won't get worse before it gets better. Teresa looked at him, at the blood still flecked on his knuckles, at the intensity in his gray eyes, at the man who'd just threatened violence for her and was now offering her freedom. She should take it. She should walk away. I'm not leaving, she said. Something shifted in Louis's expression. Relief. Concern. Something deeper she couldn't name. Then stay close to me, he said. And trust that I won't let anything happen to you. Teresa couldn't sleep after Louis left her doorway. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the hallway. The violence. The control. The way he'd looked at her afterward, like he was expecting her to run. But she hadn't run. And she wasn't sure what that said about her. At 4 a.m, she gave up. She pulled on a sweater over her sleep shirt and padded barefoot down the hallway. The house was silent, but she found her way back to the library, the one room that had felt less like a fortress and more like a place someone actually inhabited. The door was open. Light spilled into the hallway. Louis sat in one of the leather chairs, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, staring at nothing. He changed clothes, dark pants, a white t-shirt that showed the lean muscle of his arms. He looked tired. Human. He glanced up when she entered, unsurprised. Can't sleep. Can you? She countered. A slight shake of his head. He gestured to the chair across from him. Join me. Teresa sat, tucking her legs beneath her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came from two people who'd both seen too much in one night. Why do you do this? Teresa asked finally. Louis took a slow sip of his drink. Do what? Push everyone away. Build walls so high no one can climb them. She leaned forward slightly. You say it's about control, about protection. But you're just alone. His eyes lifted to hers, sharp and assessing. You think you know me after a few days. I think I know loneliness when I see it. Her voice softened. You let me see it on that terrace. The weight you carry. And tonight, I saw something else. The lengths you'll go to protect the few things you actually care about. Louis set his glass down with deliberate care. You shouldn't care about me, Teresa. Too late. The admission hung between them, raw and unguarded. He stood abruptly, crossing to the window, his back to her. You don't understand what you're saying. What I am. The things I've done. Teresa rose and moved toward him. Then tell me. Stop hiding behind the ice and just tell me. He turned, and the look on his face was something between anger and anguish. I've hurt people. Ruined lives. Made choices that keep me awake at night because I can't take them back. His voice roughened. I am exactly what they say I am. And you're light and warmth and everything I have no right to touch. Then why did you bring me here? She challenged, stepping closer. Why did you protect me? Why didn't you just let me take the out? Because I'm selfish, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Because the moment you kissed me, I wanted something I haven't wanted in years. To be seen. Not as the Ice King or the untouchable businessman or the monster in the shadows. Just seen. Teresa's breath caught. She closed the remaining distance between them, standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. I see you, she said quietly. The real you. And I'm not afraid. Louis's control cracked. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You should be. I know. He searched her eyes for another heartbeat, looking for hesitation, for doubt. When he found none, something in him broke open. He kissed her. This wasn't the brief, reckless contact from the lounge. This was deliberate. Hungry. A confession made without words. His other hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her against him, and Teresa's fingers curled into his shirt, anchoring herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Louis pressed his forehead to hers. This changes everything, he murmured. Teresa smiled slightly, her heart racing. Good. I was getting tired of your ice. His laugh was quiet, almost surprised. And for the first time since she'd met him, Louis Carson looked like a man who'd found something worth thawing for. 3 weeks later, Teresa walked into the same lounge where it had all started. The difference was that this time, she arrived with Louis. The space looked the same, dim lighting, amber glow from the backlit bar, velvet booths filled with people pretending their problems didn't exist. But the energy shifted the moment they stepped through the door. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. Eyes tracked their movement across the room with the kind of careful attention reserved for predators entering unfamiliar territory. Louis's hand rested at the small of Teresa's back, proprietary and protective. He'd insisted on bringing her here tonight, said it was important to close the loop. To show the world, his world, that she wasn't collateral damage or a momentary lapse in judgment. She was his. They moved to the bar, the same spot where Teresa had kissed him on a dare. The bartender appeared immediately, his recognition of Lewis instant and deferential. "Mr. Carson," he said. "The usual." "Two," Lewis replied, his eyes scanning the room with practiced vigilance. Teresa slid onto the bar stool, aware of the weight of attention on them. She'd been to 2 events with Lewis in the past weeks, a charity gala where she'd worn a dress that cost more than her rent, and a private dinner with associates whose names she'd been instructed to forget. She'd learned the rhythm of his world. The coded language. The unspoken hierarchies. But this was different. This was personal. Their drinks arrived. Lewis picked up his glass and turned slightly toward her, his expression softer than it would be for anyone else watching. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. Teresa took a sip, letting the burn of good whiskey settle in her chest. "Should I be?" "No." His hand found hers on the bar, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Not anymore." Movement caught her eye. Camila and Bree were sitting in the same booth they'd occupied that first night, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. Teresa caught Camila's gaze and offered a small smile. After a moment, Camila smiled back, tentative, but genuine. "Your friends look worried," Lewis observed. "They think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" Teresa turned to face him fully, taking in the sharp lines of his jaw, the gray eyes that no longer felt cold when they looked at her, the subtle relaxation in his posture that only appeared when they were alone, or nearly alone. "Probably," she said. "But I don't regret it." Something warm flickered across his face. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to something meant only for her. "Neither do I." A man approached the bar, older, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that came from money and power. He stopped a respectful distance away, waiting for acknowledgement. Lewis glanced at him. Volkov. So this was the rival who'd sent Renko. Teresa felt Lewis's hand tighten slightly on hers, a silent reassurance. "Carson," the man said, his accent thick. "I see the rumors are true." "They usually are," Lewis replied evenly. Volkov's eyes shifted to Teresa, assessing. "She must be remarkable to have earned your attention." Teresa met his gaze without flinching. She'd learned that much in Lewis's world: never show fear, never look away Faust. "She is," Lewis said, his tone carrying a warning that needed no elaboration. Volkov nodded slowly, something like respect crossing his features. "Then I offer my congratulations." He extended his hand to Lewis, a gesture of truce. "And my assurance is that our misunderstanding is resolved." Lewis shook his hand once, briefly. "See that it stays that way." Volkov inclined his head and retreated. The tension in Lewis's shoulders eased fractionally. He turned back to Teresa, and this time when he looked at her, there was something new in his expression. Pride. Possession. Trust. "You didn't flinch," he said. "I told you. I'm not afraid." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a public claim, deliberate and unmistakable. Around them, the room had gone quiet again. But this time, the silence wasn't born of fear. It was respect. For the woman who'd walked into the coldest man's world and made it warm. For the graphic designer who'd become something more. For Teresa Reyes, who'd accepted a dare and found herself a queen. She didn't need anyone to push her into things anymore. She chose this. She chose him. And everyone in that room knew it.